This is how to replace wheel studs that are either stripped or completely missing. It's quite simple to do, and there's a lot of mechanics that charge up to $100 for something like this. And since mechanics are known for ripping people off anyways, I'll just show you how to do it so you can save yourself a lot of money. The first part after taking off the wheel is to remove the brake drum, and this part is easy, but it requires finesse. With a small hammer, gently tap the drum to break it loose, and once it's loose, just pull it off and set it aside because the fun part is next. Using the same hammer, punch out the wheel stud and compare it to the new one, because even Stevie Wonder could have seen that they gave me the wrong part. But that's what happens when you go to the geniuses at O'Reilly. Those guys always give you the wrong parts more often than they give you the right ones. But after coming back, I compared it again to make sure they were identical, and this is where things got interesting. Before putting in the studs, I laid red Loctite on the splines because the wheel studs have a permanent fix, and using an open end nut like this one, I'm gonna tighten it so it pulls in the stud. Usually this could be done with a deep socket, but since all I had was a lug wrench, I put the wheel back on and just tightened it with the lug wrench. It would have also been easier if the passenger tire was touching the ground, but there was a brick next to me, so I just put it under the tire to keep it from rolling. The bad part about that is that you have to keep checking your work, but eventually I pulled in both wheel studs all the way through and began putting everything back together, starting with the brake drum. And the brake drum I had to kick in because it was a little tight, but like every guy around the world, I didn't mind it being tight. Like I said, the job is really simple to do, and it only cost me about 10 bucks to do it. The most annoying part about it was having to go back to the store, but that's history. I have a huge surprise inside this box. Before getting to that though, I want to thank everybody who's been following the journey. I know it's not easy being patient and all, but I assure you we're on the right track. Because from the moment I opened the box, I was getting ridiculed by the naysayers, the haters, the critics, and couch warriors on every video. And although they got nothing to offer like Tinder dates after sex, they still proclaim themselves as experts. Fortunately, the crumbs always fall through the cracks and the bold and courageous always prevail. So because of that, it's time to move on to the next part of the process. Truth be told, when I first got the body kit, I had no idea what I got myself into. It was overwhelming to say the least, but with the encouragement of all the good people in the chat, I've been able to keep at it, and it's been coming out amazing. Plus, I feel like I owe it to the public to finish what I started and deliver what everybody came here to see. So inside the box is what I've been dying to show you. It's the best of the best products for blending fiberglass onto metal. All of it was expensive and none of it is sponsored. So with that being said, in one shot, I'm gonna lay down Bondo and show you as I'm going through the motions, and God willing, it comes out good. This car is making a clunky noise when I'm driving, and it's annoying. It started happening back in 2020 when I stopped driving it, and since it was going to be parked anyways, I never got around to fixing it. Just take a listen. Now, believe it or not, as loud as it is, it's a simple fix, and it's a common problem on cars with high mileage. They're called sway bar links, and over time, they lose the firmness through normal wear and tear that eventually they stop serving the purpose of stabilizing the sway bar. It's best to replace both sides at the same time, because even if it's only one of them that's bad, they both have gone through the same amount of abuse. But after taking off the passenger side end link, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary that could have caused the clunky noise. But since I practice what I preach, unlike a Catholic priest, I still replaced it. It wasn't until I took off the driver's side that I noticed that one of the bolts was seized onto the bushing. And not only was it seized, but the bushing itself was torn from the inside. So obviously that was the culprit to the noise. Eventually I was able to get the bolt out and cleaned off since it was rustier than Joe Dirt's Daytona. But since everything was put back together, I lowered the car and took it out again on the same road to test it. And the clunky noise was totally eliminated. Obviously the problem was coming from the driver's side, but like I said, when it comes to suspension / chassis parts, it's always best to replace both sides at once. Let's address the elephant in the room. I was going to ignore it, but after much thought, it occurred to me that I have the responsibility to the car community to explain why I did what I did. A lot of you guys have the right to be concerned about the preload not being set, but these are not true adjustable coilovers. So the preload does not have to be adjusted. As long as the ride height is within spec, I'm free to adjust the ride height by raising or lowering the perch. That's how the suspension works. If you don't believe me, here's a screenshot of the description on the SC Suspension's website. So nothing I did was installed incorrectly, nor did I make a mistake, but regardless, don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong if you don't know what you're talking about, because all it does is make you look stupid. Just trust the process, and thank you to those who continue to be here through it all. It seems to be that whenever you're working on a dream, there's always that one cockroach that tries slithering through the cracks to bring you down, but that's why it's our job to crush them. Installing coilovers was a headache, but it had to be done because an entire brick could fit in there. I just didn't know beforehand how much work it was gonna be. Thankfully, the front suspension was already on because I'm not kidding when I say I almost ripped off my hair trying to install these. I'm not going into detail on how to swap in coilovers, only because I did that in my latest viral video, but the rear suspension was annoying because like Mario looking for Luigi, it was problem after problem. The first being that the original top hat was smaller than the aftermarket top hat, so unless I wanted to cut holes in the strut tower, there had to be another way, which there was. I found a company that sold OEM STI top hats that were 100% bolt-on, so I swapped them in and it was a perfect fit. There was no need for drilling and compromising the integrity of the strut tower, and I didn't know it at the time, but solving that problem was the least of my worries, because once the coilover was in, I went over to the other side for the same thing, but when I lowered the car to where I wanted it, the spring was just loose, just hanging around. Obviously another crossroad. So I looked online and found KW Suspensions, a company in Fichtenberg, Germany, who sold me what are called helper springs. And helper springs are cool because they're basically spacers keeping the main spring in position, but unlike big girls, they don't affect the ride quality at all. And the coolest part about them is that they're super simple to put on, since all you have to do is disassemble the coilover and drop in the helper spring along with the adapter before putting everything back together. And once everything was reassembled, I quickly mounted it on the car and did the same thing on the other side so I could finally put on the wheels and drop it. And right off the bat, the car is starting to look better and better, so I'm getting really excited. And just for fun, I took it out to look at it from a distance, and I can't believe how far it's gotten. There is still a small wheel gap, but it turns out that the only way to eliminate it is to get bigger wheels. So for now, I'm just gonna keep it on the wheels it has. I bought a $20 filter to replace the stock airbox, and I'm going to use that speed radar to see if the filter makes the dirt bike faster. But before testing the filter, it was a good idea to first get the top speed of the bike in its stock form for an accurate comparison. So I drove about half a mile back and opened it full throttle. And one thing about these dirt bikes is that they always sound like they want another gear. But regardless, after 2 passes, the top speed was still only 45 miles an hour. So I brought it back to swap in the aftermarket filter because I wanted to see if my money was well spent or if I made a huge mistake like the CEO of Bud Light. Thankfully, it didn't take that long to swap out before I was back on the road to run the same test. And right off the bat, the bike sounded a lot deeper, so I thought it was going to be a lot faster. And to no surprise, both runs clocked in at 47 miles an hour, which was 2 miles faster than the previous run. So at the end of the day, the filter was worth it because not only did the bike run faster, but it also sounded better and it felt more torquey the more I rode it. This dirt bike is not working like it's supposed to. Although it's a blast to ride around and it gets a lot of attention from the girls, there's a small problem that is preventing me from riding it. You see this valve here? It's called a petcock. Right now, it's in the off position and the tank is empty. But when I go to put in gas, it starts leaking like a venereal disease. So that's a clear sign to me that the petcock is bad. And instead of trying to rebuild it, I bought a brand new one from China because the OEM part from Honda is $87. And I'm not Elon Musk. I don't have that type of money. So first, I took off the seat and pulled out the gas tank to work on it comfortably on the workbench. And after taking off the 2 bolts, I'm pretty sure the reason it was leaking was because the seal was corroded. But regardless, I wasn't going to return it since I already paid for it. So I bolted it in the gas tank and slammed it on the dirt bike. And before putting everything back together, I again put in gas to make sure that it wasn't going to leak, which it wasn't. And it seemed to be working good. So I turned it on to test it and it was working exactly how it should. Unfortunately, I couldn't ride it because the front tire was flat, but that was an easy fix. Today I'm lowering the Subaru, and why lie? I paid more for these coilovers than I did for the entire car, but I wanted only the best parts from the Subaru, and for spending as much as I did, they better be worth it. The first thing I did was lubricate the rusty nuts because God only knows when they were last put in. But I also loosened the strut from the top to allow for more wiggle room at the bottom, and after taking off the clip, the brake line was trapped inside its bracket. So with the cheap Walmart Dremel, I began cutting it loose, and right when I was almost through, it blew up in my face. Luckily with a set of pliers, I was able to break it free. But after that, everything else was as straightforward as changing out a pair of shoes, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. But I've never driven a car with coilovers, so I'm low-key wondering how it's going to feel once I'm on the road, because I'm pretty sure it's going to take a lot of getting used to. However, I still put on the wheel and for fun, measured the distance from the tire to the fender, and it read about 6 inches. Then I measured the stock side and it was almost at 10 inches, so that was a massive improvement. And since I was eager to see the car on the ground, I quickly swapped in the coilover and put the wheel back on. But when I lowered the car, I seen that it was in fact lower, but like Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, I wanted to get more low. So I jacked up the car again and adjusted the coilovers until I was happy with the ride height. And that too was easy. All it took was an Allen key to unlock and lock the collar. And once everything was put back together, I lowered the car and fell in love with the new ride height. The rear has an even larger wheel gap, but I'm gonna do that in another video because it's gonna take some modifying to put them on. But like I said, I'll explain that in the next video because for now, I just want to sit back and admire this thing. Wow. So today we came to a Audi and Porsche dealership because they have some exotic cars in there. And since I'm working on the Subaru, I want to get some ideas, and what better cars to look at than exotic. So let's get to it. Dang, look at this thing here. An Audi R8 convertible. I think it's so crazy how newer cars still have cigarette lighters like that instead of just a USB port.
Everybody smokes.
So what I'm looking for here, what I came for, is to look at details, you know, like body lines and stuff like that. And especially what I want to be looking at is the under fender, not so much on the rear, but on the front, because since the wide body panel, the fenders in the front are a lot wider than they are on regular stock cars. These cars already come equipped with them, obviously, you know. And you see here, they have some vents here. So when I work on some, I want to make sure that the front here has some vents. So you got two Ferraris here, Spiders. Look how short these things are, man. I'm not that tall, 5'11", 6 foot, but it comes up to like my belly button almost, you know? It's insane.
You see yourself in one of these?
Not one of these. I see myself in one of those. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is a Porsche GT3. It's a metallic silver, and the paint is immaculate. The holy grail here. You can just see the body lines from the back all the way to the front and how they just line up, and that's what you want. So when I start working on the car, just know that, you know, the idea came from something like this. Stay tuned, guys. It's gold-plated emblems. Today, I'm installing this freshly primed spoiler, and it's going to make the car look completely different. I know a lot of people are going to talk shit about putting the STI wing on a non-STI car, but I say if Trump could sleep with a porn star and pay her hush money, I could also do whatever I want. However, a spoiler does take time to put on, especially when it's a two-piece like this one, because you have to screw them both together. But like bringing home two girls from the bar, all it takes is a little finesse and careful coordination. And I know I shouldn't be saying this, but it's safe to say that I am never again repairing a spoiler. Working on this thing was so time consuming that at the end of the day, I should have just bought a brand new one. And for that reason, I have the utmost respect for bodywork professionals. Those people must have the patience of a monk. But regardless of the fact, it came out looking great and it looks incredible on the car. I'm just missing the third brake light that goes in between here. So if you know where to find one, please, please, please let me know in the comments. Thanks, Pop. 3 weeks ago was the last time I changed out my air filter. And since every day I drive on dirt roads, my filters get filthy very quickly. But there's only so many times I could beat it against the floor before I realized that it's not making a difference. I wish my mom would have known that. So my only option is to WWE the filter and stomp the dirt out. I call this one the cowboy stomp, and it's innovative, unlike the new iPhone 14. I'm just kidding. Bazinga, or whatever Sheldon Cooper says. I bought a brand new one, but you wouldn't believe how expensive these filters are, and you have to change them out every so often. When I first bought a semi-truck, everybody told me how expensive maintenance was, but it wasn't until I started doing my own maintenance that I realized, damn, I should have stayed in retail. I bought new parts for the dirt bike, and since professional shops charge through the roof, I'm gonna change out the engine oil, tranny oil, and coolant myself to save myself from spending a lot of money. The first fluid I'm gonna change is the engine oil, and shops charge $125 for this service, but it's one of the easiest things to do. Literally, after draining the oil, there's two bolts that hold in place a filter, and once the old filter is removed and the new one is installed, tightening the bolt on the bottom is mandatory, because using the same amount of oil that was removed, I refilled the measuring cup with the fresh oil and poured it in all at once. And if you're curious, this CRF 250R takes about 650 milliliters. But next is the transmission oil, and this job is even easier, which is why it's the cheapest of the three services at $88 to change. And for this job, once the oil is fully drained, you close it up and go to the other side of the bike where the filler hole is at, and when everything is poured, there's a bolt right below the water pump that is used to check the level, since there's no dipstick for tranny oil. Another fluid that has no dipstick is the coolant, which again, shops charge $125 to flush, and I don't even understand why. The bolt to drain it is on the pump itself, and once it's empty and the bolt is back on, you open the one bottle and pour it into the radiator while every now and then pumping the hoses to burp the system and allow for more cooling. A good rule of thumb is to fill it to the neck of the radiator so it doesn't leak, but it's really as simple as that, which is crazy because in just under 30 minutes, I saved myself over $300. So now with everything cleaned up, it's time to go celebrate by going on a ride. I was on my way to get a vasectomy this morning when suddenly my truck did not want to start. And I thought, is this a sign from God or what in the world is going on? So I popped open the hood and immediately noticed the battery terminals corroded and broken in half like the lot of banned TikTok. And since I already knew something like this was going to happen, was already prepared with a new set of terminals inside of the glove box. However, this DIY is not hard. The first step is to disconnect the battery, starting with the negative terminal first to make sure we don't accidentally short circuit anything. And with the battery fully disconnected, the second step is to start removing the old terminals by snipping them off with cable cutters. But once they're off the cables, the third step is to attach the new terminals, making sure they're crimped down tighter than my nuts are going to be later this afternoon. And this step right here is the most crucial because a secure connection could save you from being stranded in the middle of nowhere. But with that out of the way, the final step is to connect the new terminals to the post, starting with the positive one this time to again prevent an accidental shortage. But with both terminals on there snug like a bug, the moment of truth is turning the key on to see if it starts, which it does. So wish me luck as I go to the clinic to become sterile, because at the end of the day, whether it's fixing a truck or making a personal decision, preparation and taking things step by step makes all the difference. I'm putting my dirt bike back together because today I'm taking it to the mechanic. I already cleaned out the carburetor, changed out the fluids, and even went as far as to adjusting the valves, but I still can't get it to run. And since it is my dream bike, I'm willing to pay good money to anybody who could help figure out what's going on with it. My guess is that it needs a tune-up because it has a zesty spark, it has good compression, and it fires up after a couple kicks, but as soon as it hit the throttle, it shuts off, which leads me to believe that it's a fuel-related issue. But I must have gone through the carburetor at least a billion times trying to fix it, and at best, it only starts up if I'm lucky. The truth is that even the Grey Leo Dan brand scratches its head sometimes, and that's nowhere close to an exaggeration. This thing has been such a headache trying to figure out that out of the hundreds of bikes that I've owned, it's the one bike that I'm most interested in getting up and running again because of how mysterious it's turned out to be. Luckily, there was a local shop that was willing to take it off my hands and figure out what is wrong with it, and although it may cost me an arm and a leg, it's the price I'm willing to pay since I've had the bike for over a month now and I still haven't rode it. So after loading it up and strapping it down, I drove off to Visalia and dropped it off with a professional. So I'll keep you guys posted with how it goes. My truck has foggy headlights, so today I'm gonna make them look brand new. And there's a ton of ways to do it. I've even seen people use an orange to clean them, but since I already used mine earlier, I'm gonna do it the right way, which is by using sandpaper, a polisher, and a bottle of clear coat. The first step after taping off the headlight though is to bring out warm soapy water because this job requires using 3 variations of wet sandpaper. So starting with the most gritty of them all at 800 grit, the 800 grit is just used to knock down all the deep scratches and rock chips left behind from everyday driving. And once the headlight is washed off with regular water, something like 1200 grit is used to knock down the scratches left behind by the 800 grit sandpaper. And as you probably guessed by now, once that too is washed off, the last sandpaper is the finest of them all at 2000 grit, and it's used to both smooth out the scratches of the 1200 and also prepare the headlight for polishing. But restoring headlights is a job that detailers charge up to $80 for, and it's a shame because it really only takes about 30 minutes to do. So paying someone to do it is a bigger ripoff than paying for an Asian massage. The most expensive tool is a polisher, and for the compound, you could use whatever you want, but I found Scratch X to work the best, and it's only like $6. So after squeezing some onto the pad and headlight, it's a good idea to spread it around and give it a couple passes while every so often stopping and check how they're looking to see where it needs more compound. But it really is that easy. It only takes about 5 minutes per headlight, and since this one ended up looking nice and shiny, did the same thing to the other side and it came out just as nice. Unfortunately, they called me in at work, so I didn't have time to finish spraying it with clear coat, but leaving it like this is perfectly fine. They look brand new, and from the start, that's exactly what I wanted. This girl came in today asking if I could customize her car, and since making things look better is my thing, I'm gonna spray it with Plasti Dip and hopefully she likes how it comes out. However, I'm not spraying the entire car, no. Instead, I'll be using it on the trim piece that runs along the front, basically changing it from chrome to black. And the first thing I'm gonna do is tape off the surrounding areas to avoid overspray, because although Plasti Dip is removable, it's technically rubber coating, so it will leave droplets anywhere that isn't covered. But before getting to that, I had asked her if she wanted the emblem sprayed or if she wanted it chrome, and She told me to cover it, so I gave her what she wanted and masked it off. And for extra protection, I also wrapped the bumper in plastic sheeting because the next step is where things got interesting. Using 1 can of plastic dip, I shook it for a minute and began spraying the first coat lightly in a fanning motion, about 6 inches away. Then I came back around in the same fashion, making sure not to spray too much. But for each coat that was sprayed, I let it sit for 10 minutes and continued laying down heavier coats, darkening the color and thickening the layer of the material because, like Sir Isaac Newton, I too like them thick, or whatever he said. But I ended up spraying 3 coats in total and using only half a can, and even though the can says that the dry time is 4 hours, after 40 minutes or so, it felt dry enough to take off the masking, including the emblem that she so desperately wanted. And once everything was off, it looked amazing. All that was left to do was to send her on her way and wave her a goodbye. These are my 3 project cars, and although I love them all, the Subaru forever has my heart, and I'll love it until the day I drop. But whether it's the Subaru, the MR2, or the Toyota pickup, they all have their pros and cons, and the MR2 is probably the one with the most. It has to be the most funnest car I've driven, with its T-tops and the engine in the back, so it truly is one of a kind. But the biggest downfall of the MR2 is the ride height, because even on stock suspension, the roof reaches my navel, which makes it, in comparison to the Subaru, about a foot shorter, even though the Subaru is lowered on coilovers. Now the Toyota pickup, on the other hand, is the most reliable truck ever built. This thing is more dependable than my left hand on a lonely Saturday night, and if I had to say just one bad thing about it, it would be that the engine only has the power of 100 horses, so it's in no means fast or worthy of racing. And for that reason, I'm building a Subaru GCA, and on a personal note, personal life and career changes have made me hold back on finishing the build, which is why I haven't posted of it in a while. But the wide body kit is on, and it's sprayed with epoxy sealer, so it's safe to say that out of the 3 projects, the Subaru is the closest one to being finished. So after working through these changes, the Subaru will move up on the list as a priority and will be going through the next stages of its build.